Hello and welcome to Malimpus Island. It's lovely to have you here. I'm really excited that you're here joining me in this series as we attempt to figure out if there are any innovative or new ways to design cities in this game. Now, disclaimer, this is the first full-on decorated city that I'm going to attempt to make, so obviously there are going to be mistakes. But this is what I want this series to be. I want this to be a documentation of experiments, failures, and hopefully successes of trying to figure out a city from scratch. Now, instead of jumping right into the build, I wanted to show a little bit of the behind the scenes. So my planning stage, like some drafts that I did, and really just the conceptualizing of what I wanted Malimpus Island to be before we started building. So with that, let's jump to future me. Hello, it's future me. So let's begin with the conceptualization stage. So I'm gonna base Malimpus Island around a few cities and countries that I've been to or lived in. In terms of style, I'm going to use a couple of examples, namely Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK, London in the UK, Melbourne in Australia, and Singapore. Right, so the actual moving into planning stuff. What I really wanted to focus on for this entire island is a public transit oriented system. So I know the general thing that people would do is create the road networks first, but this time around I decided for Malimpus Island to focus on creating the transport networks first and then develop it around it. I based this plan around the idea of having 100,000 people to start with, and ideally a load of about 10,000 public transit passengers. So what I'm doing is actually figuring out where to place each station based on the map. So we're kind of doing a topographic transport network map to start with as a draft to figure out like how many stations there should be, how we should space it out before we go into a finalized proper diagram, I guess you would say, the ones that you would typically see when you're at a station. I got a map from the cinematographer, that mod, if you know what I'm talking about, which allows you to export maps of your city, and from there I imported it into Illustrator and began by drafting out a rough network as to how I wanted trains to spread out. Now, we're mainly going to focus on a couple of different options, the highest capacity of which will be the metros. As I drafted this out, I figured out that I was going to have a couple of different versions of metros. So we have the high capacity trains, which will use about 6 to 8 car trains, the medium capacity lines, which will have somewhere between 3 and 4, and then the light rail, which will utilize more tram-like systems. Depending on the capacity, I've also made variations as to how far each station is between each other, because as much as I would like to get as many stations as possible, I understand that that will really impact how efficient a line is when it has to keep stopping. We'll also be supplementing it with buses, so for areas that may not necessarily be covered by the rail network. I'm also going to be designing the town centers around the idea of them being walkable, as well as creating a bicycle-oriented road network in each town. I think most cities are built in a way that there is a city center and like a main place where people come and do business and have all of the leisure and stuff. But in this case, I wanted to experiment a little bit with some form of decentralizing. So I wanted to move it so that there are different business districts across the island. What I'm hoping to achieve is having an even spread of load across the entire network at all times to make sure that we don't run into any issues with having to balance capacity with having too many trains on the network. Now, while train breakdowns and stuff aren't actually simulated in the game, I do want to make this a realistic challenge for me, and because of that, I am planning to include built-in redundancies across the network. So what I mean by that is, say a train line breaks down, there should be an alternative way to get to that station. And all of this is still open to suggestions and changes. So if you feel like what the network I've come up with may not be the best, please suggest it down below. So the first draft I did really focused on trying to have as many redundancies as possible, and towards the end of it I realized that this was not gonna be the most efficient way to do things. So I decided to simplify it a little bit, still have some redundancy, but minimize the number of train lines in particular. By the time I figured out what I really wanted to do with this map, I started including features like where the airport was going to be, and also how this network would interchange with the passenger train network. So that's something that we might explore if we ever get there. And yeah, so this is the planned network that I'm going to base the entire island around. So we have the high capacity green, teal, blue and purple lines, we have the medium capacity red and yellow lines, and then we have the light rail in the grey and dotted line. We have the airport in the southeast of the island away from anywhere, and we have a couple of passenger train interchanges all around the network. There were some compromises to be made because of the terrain, and that made it difficult to do the ideal lines that I would have done. Also, I should just mention while we are on a topographic view, I am open to doing like a land reclamation style thing with this island. So for example, where the airport is going to be in the southeastern area, we might end up bringing it out and creating a proper rectangular area for the airport. Ultimately, that comes down to how much space we need, which, judging by the look of it right now, we need a lot of it. As you can see, we have areas that have the most interchanges being the city centers or the different decentralized city centers. We have one district in the north, another one in the northwest, and then I guess the main city center, which we'll still have, is gonna be in the southwestern area of the island. So we begin our building expedition with Welford. So this is going to be a northwestern district that is connected by the purple and green lines. Now, why Welford? I don't know, but we're gonna go for it because it sounded like a nice name for the district. So I begin with the bus interchange because for some reason I was really fascinated with being able to do a custom bus interchange. So I worked on that for a bit, figured out how to use the ploppable asphalt mod, which allows you to place like these different surfaces and create your own kind of roads. Now please don't appreciate this part too much because in the end I realized that the asphalt was too annoying and I got rid of most of it. But it laid down the foundations for the overall shape of the bus interchange. So it ended up becoming a kind of like semicircular with extra rectangles. I really do not explain the shape, but you'll see once we get there. There are 4 berths which buses can haul at, and they're spread out across this entire interchange. I really wanted to minimize having to cross any sort of road, so for that reason I went for this shape. I really wanted to make sure that it was a realistic bus interchange, so for that reason I included things like the wooden walkway as you're seeing here, and also having different elements that make it more visually interesting. So we have the glass area that goes on top of each berth, and these are pretty spacious in case things get a bit congested during peak periods. And there are also facilities like benches and information screens, dustbins, although I did read somewhere that recently networks have been avoiding placing dustbins in places because like people might hide suspicious objects in there or something. I don't know, but yeah, I took that into consideration because why not? As part of my integrated transport network proposal, I'm making sure that the metro system is pretty close by to the bus network. Unfortunately, with this shape, some of the berths are a bit of a long walk compared to others, so I think in hindsight I should have flipped the shape a little, like 90 degrees, so that it was all within equal walking distance. But you know, this is said and done, we'll work on it the next time we build a bus interchange. Because this was also a metro interchange station, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't like a regular City Skylines station where you have to place them separately and then the passengers have to like move so many different ways just to get to a different station. I tried to move the station into the elevated area so it looks like it's an actual part of the station. As to whether they work, I don't know because I haven't actually tested it, so we're gonna see. I'm gonna leave it there. If it does, good. If not, well, that's gonna kind of mess up the entire integrated idea, but I guess we'll have to work around it if that happens. With this interchange, I also focused a lot on the pedestrian side of things. So rather than begin with the roads, I used pavements to signify where the pedestrians can walk, And that was really my main focus. So we have the herringbone tiles that are going everywhere. This forms the main option of kind of exploring the area, I guess, which is on foot or by bicycle. I made sure these were spacious to enable for bicycles and pedestrians to share the road, although for future town center builds, I think I might even do dedicated bicycle areas just to prevent like collisions or things going wrong basically. I used some wood tiles as well just to provide some contrast between the plain tiles, and the bus interchange is differentiated with the concrete pavement slabs that are slightly raised above the regular walking areas. With the area being heavily pedestrianized, I wanted to make sure that things were safe as well, so I introduced a bollard system across wherever the roads might meet the pedestrian area, just to provide a bit of safety and minimize any accidents that might occur. Again, none of this is actually simulated, but I'm trying to build this from a perspective of a supposed realistic city. Right behind the bus interchange will be the High Street of Welford. So as of now, all we've really done is created the street itself and introduced a few buildings. We have some office blocks, as well as a department store. I want to work a bit more on this area to make sure that it feels lived in, feels realistic, and just has a different, like a vibe to it, I guess, because as of yet, it is just a collection of buildings. I found these canals that I might use when I figure out how to actually implement them. They might be used in this particular area, but if not, we'll use them in a different district. I realized there was a bit of space left over where the high street was, so I decided to make that a park so that we have a park in the center of the town and bring in a bit of greenery into what would be a very built up area. And the park design I ended up going for was pretty draft because I ran out of time for this week, to be honest. So I did a draft design just so I could come back and work on it in a future part. Speaking of time running out, that is pretty much all I've managed to achieve for this episode of Malimpus Island. A lot of it was behind the scenes work and just planning as to how to get things done. I want to make sure that we start off on the right foot, and because of that, the planning did take a lot longer than I guess it usually would if I was building this on my own. Also, a lot of these are, I guess you would say, unconventional, but I'm gonna treat this as a big experiment, Malimpus Island, and see how things go, basically, if we don't go by the usual approaches. I'm curious to see what you guys think about the plans we have for this island, what I've done so far. If you have any suggestions, because I know that things are not perfect and there's some things like color correction that I am not too keen about at the moment, drop me some comments and I will get back to you and see what I can implement and what I can change. But besides that, that is the end of the episode. So thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Malimpus Island.